Okay, in this video I want to talk about the different types of boundaries that exist and what landforms can form as a result of these boundaries, okay? But let me first talk about divergent boundaries. Divergent boundaries. Now, as I mentioned, when plates separate in the previous video, so plates separate, okay? Separate. They leave a rift behind here, a rift. A rift is basically a deep crack. Okay, it's like a big hole. It's a deep crack between them, and then magma from the asthenosphere actually comes up. So magma comes up and then solidifies, okay? Solidifies as it cools. So magma is, remember, really, really hot liquid, semi-liquid. And then you get, when it solidifies, you get new crust. Okay, so the diverging boundaries are also known as constructive boundaries. Constructive because they form new crust, they construct new crust. And they occur on land and in sea. Okay. Okay, and these are also called spreading zones, rifts, right? Here's an example. There's the Mid-Atlantic Rift. I talked about that in a couple of videos ago. Sorry, Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It runs through the island of Iceland. Okay, Iceland's north of the globe. Okay, the island actually widens. It's actually widening as new crust is formed. Okay, and you also get volcanic eruptions as a result. So because these move, it's widening because these two plates are moving apart and magma is coming up and solidifying, forming new crust. Another example is Africa, East Africa. So remember the Great Rift Valley. Actually, no, I didn't talk about this. My apologies. The Great Rift Valley runs along east part of Africa. Okay, land is separating in this case. Land is separating. Same thing with Iceland, right? Land is separating. And you're getting volcanoes forming too. Okay, and you're getting a new ocean being formed too. Okay, in the sea. Remember, it could be in both sea and land. Divergent boundary, constructive boundaries. Okay. So that's diverging boundaries. Let me now talk about converging boundaries. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, this is when you've got colliding plates, right? So subduction zones are created. Subduction zones are created. These are zones where crust is formed, right? Subduction zones. Crust is formed where one goes below the other. My apologies. Yeah, that's what subduction means. When one plate goes beneath another. Now, rock is actually destroyed at these boundaries. So why is it destroyed? Because let's say you've got some big slabs of rock here. As they come together, the two plates, they start breaking apart. Okay, and so these boundaries are also known as destructive boundaries. Destructive boundaries. Okay, because they destroy. They result in the destruction of rock. Okay, and these actually form mountains, underwater trenches, and chains of islands. Chains of islands. And as I mentioned, subduction is if the oceanic crust collides with the continental crust, the denser oceanic plate sinks underneath, and that's subduction. Okay, if that was to occur underwater. And so the continental plate then becomes distorted if that happens, and then you get what's called fold mountains and volcanoes. Fold mountains and volcanoes. Special types of mountains, okay? So let me actually draw a diagram. Okay, so the oceanic crust goes beneath the continental. Okay, that's subduction. And so this plate becomes distorted, continental plate, right? And so you get mountains and volcanoes forming. Okay, it gets bigger. When two oceanic plates collide, however, the faster moving plate goes underneath the other. Okay, so that's oceanic, continental. This is two oceanic plates colliding. And if they collide, the faster moving one goes beneath the other one, right? Makes sense. If you've got two cars coming head on, the faster car will most likely go beneath the other car, right? Let's say that the faster car is an Aston Martin, right, convertible to a short car, a small car, and it's going head on with a Jeep, right? It will most likely go beneath the Jeep. So that's what happens when two plates come together, oceanic plates. You get a deep trench as well, I should mention. A deep trench. This is the deep trench. Okay, and the descending plate, this plate here, the plate that's going underneath, it melts. Okay, this melts and gets destroyed. Why? Because it's going to the magma, the mantle, the asthenosphere, right? It consists of hot magma, so it melts. Magma will melt just about anything and gets destroyed. Okay, that results in a chain of volcanic islands. Remember, volcanoes are made of rock and magma, right? So you have rock and you have magma. Okay, and the magma, as you know, comes up into the plate. Okay. Okay. Now, collision boundaries, as I mentioned. So here are some examples of what results from collision boundaries. You get mountains, okay, like the Himalayas. Himalayas is in Nepal, basically over Nepal, over India. Himalayas, okay, Himalayan mountains, volcanoes, trenches, and island arcs. Okay, for example, the Mariana Islands is actually in the Philippines. So it's part of the Philippine plate. So these form as a result of collision boundaries. And now mountains occur when two continental plates collide. Okay, so as I mentioned, these two collide, and they're both pushed upwards. Okay, both of these are pushed upwards because neither of them are dense. Okay, they're both the same density, more or less. So you get a mountain system like the Himalayas, a massive mountain range. Okay, you get trenches, as I mentioned, from when oceanic plates. When an oceanic plate goes beneath the continental plate, you get a deep trench formed. Island arcs, these are basically strips of island. Okay, arcs because arcs look like something like this, so the islands look something like that. Okay, they're not perfectly straight. And so that's what you get from collision boundaries. Let me now talk about transform boundaries. Okay, so this is the last form, transform boundaries. Okay, as I mentioned, when two plates slide parallel to each other, so that means parallel to, being a bit sloppy here, but in opposite directions, you get an earthquake. That's what an earthquake is, when two plates rub against each other. Okay, one going this way, one going this way, and they rub against one another. Okay, and many cracks in the rock that form between the boundaries. Okay, you get mountains formed as well in some cases. Okay, mountains and earthquakes. Okay, the transform boundary where this occurs, okay, is called a fault line. Fault line. The most common, I'd say, is the San Andreas fault line, and yes, it's the city in Grand Theft Auto. Okay, San Andreas fault transform boundary or fault line, same thing. Now in this case, you've got the Pacific plate from the Pacific Ocean colliding rubbing against the North American plate. Okay, they're going in opposite directions, and you get some earthquakes. Okay, they're very common, and the cities of Los Angeles and San Francisco are actually built around this line. Another example is New Zealand. Okay, you've got the Indo-Australian plate rubbing against the Pacific plate, the Pacific Ocean. Now, the movement of this transform boundary creates the mountains. Okay, so the mountains of the South Island of New Zealand actually formed as a result of these two plates, okay? And their transform boundaries.